Yeah.
गुड इवनिंग, नमस्कार। चंडीगढ़ लिटरेरी सोसाइटी की तरफ से आप सबको मेरा यानी निहारिका का सादर प्रणाम और बहुत-बहुत स्वागत। Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of CLS Conversations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we at Chandigarh Literary Society believe that conversation is an art. And we here have been experts at it since the very beginning. However, when I say that, I just exclude myself from this statement because I'm just a novice. And I'm getting to learn from the very best at Chandigarh Literary Society. And today we are in conversation with one such person whom I look up to greatly and from whom I have learned the art of conversation and the art of appreciating good poetry and literature. The person who's responsible for founding and being the chairperson of this platform, which nurtures art, literature, creativity, music, poetry, and also revolutionary and free thinking ideas. And if that is not an inspiration enough, then I must also tell you that she has also been awarded the Woman Leader of the Decade in Public Life Award for her contribution to leadership and gender at the International Women Economic Forum in New Delhi. And we must already be very well acquainted with Dr. Sumita Misra, for she's the founder chairperson of Chandigarh Literary Society. But I must still tell you that she has been serving in the Haryana cadre since 1990, and she has always remained at the top of her class, be it in school, college, or now in the class of life. What an honor, ma'am, to be welcoming you to this conversation. A very good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Namaste, Niharika, and to everyone. What a lovely introduction you've given, and wholly undeserving. But yes, it's delightful to be here. It's like home territory, of course, and I'm more used to being in your position because yeah, that's enjoyable. And also, I think because I think I'm more reticent about myself as a poet. But thank you for that very generous introduction, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Well, no, ma'am, I think, it all comes from the heart. And I've been reading your poem for the past 2 and 3 days. I will get to those later. But first, I must ask you, so, a little birdie tells me that you were born and brought up in Lucknow and you're a Lucknowi at heart. Where do
Oh,
your allegiances lie exactly? Chandigarh, Delhi, or Lucknow?
a good question because, okay, my Twitter profile also says Lucknowi. So I think that is, Lucknow is not a geographical place, at least not for me. And I think for many fellow Lucknowis also, Lucknow is a concept, it's a way of being, it's a way of life. And it's a way of life that's wonderful, syncretic, wonderfully inclusive. You've heard about Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, but वहाँ पे ऐसी कोई तहजीब नहीं है because we never think about these things consciously. It is actually a very nice state of oneness and openness, and I'm very glad.
Well, I hope there's no problem in my internet connectivity. Ma'am, we seem to have lost you. So much for technology these days, where we keep losing our connections, but I'm sure she'll be back in just a minute. Anshuman, I hope you're able to hear her backstage. I hope there's no problem in my connectivity. Okay, so I've been getting the comments in private chat that my internet connection is fine. We seem to have lost ma'am. No worries, we will get her back in time. In the meantime, while she was telling us about her influences of Lucknow and that state of oneness, I have a very interesting question brewing in my mind. But till the time, I can tell our audience that the Chandigarh Literary Society's story writing competition has started, and you can send in your entries. The details are there on our Facebook page, which is by the name of Chandigarh Literary Society. And you must also follow us on our Instagram account, which is CLS Chandigarh. You will keep getting your daily dose of poetry, prose, and stories there. So you must make it a point to follow that. And in the meantime, let me just read some of the wonderful comments that are coming to us from our audience. So Paras Piniji asks, what's the procedure to send you poems and other works? Paras sir, so if you go to our Facebook page, you will find an email ID there mentioned in the posters, and you can keep sending your work over there. We have Sumita ma'am back, so we just lost you there for a couple of minutes or so.
Thanks for that, Niharika. Because even if you're living in so-called Lutyens, Delhi, you can have these connectivity issues. So, what to say? But thank you for taking over. I don't know where I was when I lost connection. I was just saying that Lucknow is more of a state of mind and a state of being. For all Lucknowis, they will understand what I mean. World, you carry that state of mind, you carry that state of openness and oneness and poetry and adab and tehzeeb and a little time for the more beautiful things in life. So always a Lucknowi at heart, but Chandigarh has been home for so many years. I think I've lived there longer than I've lived anywhere else. And my daughters have grown up there, so that makes it home in a very big sense. And but very happy to be in Delhi now, and so thank you for that question. Very happy to own all three cities.
Well, that's great, you know. So I myself belong to Delhi, but I have a part of me living in Chandigarh as well because I have a part of my roots there. So I can quite connect to what you're saying because I own the two cities as well, you know, as much Chandigarh as much Delhi. And now I must get to your profession. So you're
And
an
that makes us
artist.
richer, that just makes us richer in the process.
Absolutely, because I think those influences find themselves in whatever you do in life, and your influences are quite
Yeah.
mixed. So, coming to that now, you are an IAS by profession, and I can only imagine how demanding that must be, right? But I seem to find a state of oneness with your poems and with your profession as well. How does an IAS manage to create that? And how does poetry find its way into your life?
Well, yes, it is a very demanding profession, and I think even more so if you are trying to balance profession and a home, being a mother, being a wife, and finding some of that precious me time. But I believe in life that whatever you love never goes away from you. Eh, Either you find your way back to it or it finds its way back to you. And I think that is the equation with poetry and me. For many years, for I was writing since I was a child, but for many years in between, when I was really in the thick of the career and two small babies and everything, yes, I didn't get time to write. So there are, but then luckily the muse doesn't desert its own. I got back to writing and I published my first book pretty late in life in 2011. And but I think what I think that was a good thing because everything that I experienced in the interim, whether personally or professionally, and this job gives you such a huge canvas and such a huge connect to people at every stage, from the most underprivileged to the most powerful. And that whole spectrum is itself an education. And yes, I think it takes time to distill and crystallize any of that into poetry. So, and I'm very glad that I have it back now. My mother said ki always used to say, "Tum to nichachar ho." So that is when I write poetry, usually late at night, because the day is always so busy. But it's worth being a nishachar if you think you can get something personally valuable and poetic out of it.
You know, I think I have always been of the opinion that night time is the most natural state of being of the universe, you know. So if you look at the universe, the outer space, it's all dark, it's all black, and it's the natural state. So whenever somebody says
I'm
that they
very happy to hear that. I total night bird right here.
correct, correct. So, drawing on that, while I was reading these 3, 4 days, your books, all your books, I find references to light and dark at several places. At times, there is mention of night, at times, there is mention of day, or, you know, daybreak and night intertwine themselves in just one poem. Talk to us about those.
It's interesting you say that because even in the titles of my books, there is a journey of light. My
Correct.
first book was in English, and it's titled A Life of Light. And the second one, it was in Hindustani, which is called Zara Si Dhoop, implying कि कई बार जीने के लिए सिर्फ जरा सी धूप काफी है ना, जैसे एक पौधा जो स्ट्रगल कर रहा है against all odds.
Mm-hmm.
The third book was again in Hindustani, and that was वक्त के उजाले में, in the light of time. So putting that journey of light and time together. And the fourth one is called Petrichor, which is not directly related with light and dark, but okay, clouds, rain, renewal, and Petrichor is that really heady smell of earth and rain meeting. So yes, there is a journey of light and dark, and I don't see them as a duality really. I have experienced them and see them as a oneness. They just, the difference between actually all Western thought, which on reading and realizing one learned, and Eastern thought is that things are not linear; they're circular. So light is not just light. Light is also the absence of dark. And dark is not just dark, it's the absence of light. So they're exactly one and complementary. It depends on your state of seeing. So I guess that sort of answers your question.
Correct. I think it does, and I could go on and on with this one, but that brings me to a very interesting dedication that I read in Petrichor. It's to your daughters, and I have never mentioned this to you before, but when I was reading, I felt that it's perfectly circular and it has a perfect symmetry to it. Would you just want to read that dedication to us, followed by one of your favorite English poems?
Okay. Uh, Thank you for that, Niharika, because yes, that dedication is actually not just a dedication to my daughters, but I would say from all parents to all children, because that's what being a parent means. But yes, more so, I would say as a woman to her daughters, because I believe deeply, deeply in that cause, and I will tell you more about that later. But anyway, so this Petrica reads for my daughters, for Arushi and Gurmeher. You bend time. You bend time, your laughter is the cipher unlocking tomorrow. Thank you for that, Niharika. Okay. You bend time, your laughter is the cipher unlocking tomorrow. You are both circularity. Circularity, the bond between parents and children, and singularity. You are me born again. You are you born afresh. May you command. May you command universes again as destined at the start. So this is a mother's blessing to her daughters.
That was beautiful. Now, coming to your poetic influences. So, we've already talked about cities in one sense, but I'm sure there must have been other poetic influences. First is that. And second, poetry finding its way into your life is one thing, but I want to know what it means to you. I've found two poems in your books, which I will ask you to read after this question. But do tell us what poetry really means to you in all its sense.
Those are too many big questions, by the way. So I'm really going to have to break them down. But firstly, poetic influences. Too many, just too many. Because I used to love to read, especially as a child, as a young adult, and I used to read everything. So poetic influences. I think we had this book Panorama in school. That was ICSC ki Panorama, and there were some poems only that one had to read in Panorama as part of the syllabus. I have read the whole book, I think, multiple times. And one of the poems that poets that I loved back then and still do was Tennyson. particularly his poem Ulysses, you know, to seek
Yes.
knowledge like a sinking star, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Those lines still resonate with me as sharply as they did then. Then, of course, one read the romantic poets and liked them very much: Keats, Shelley, Wordsworth. But I have loved the body of modern work that has emerged. I love Stevie Smith, a female poet, Robert Graves, um, Dylan Thomas. There are just too many to name. And talking of Indian poets, I love the Chayavad Kavis, Mahadevi Verma, uh, Sumitra Nandan Pant's lines for me till today I think, are the reason why anyone writes poetry. कि विरह से उपजा होगा पहला वियोगी होगा पहला कवि विरह से उपजा होगा पहला गान that it has to be a lover's lament that is the first starting of poetry. I have read Kalidas and Bhartahari translations, of course, and love them. I'm very grateful to this body of Western scholars that has given us such brilliant translations of our Sanskrit poets, because that has not been available through Indian translators at all. And in Indian English, I've really enjoyed Nizam Ezekiel and many modern poets. So it's a very big body. So that's the first part. What was the second part of your question?
The second part was that finding its way into your life for poetry was one thing, but what does it mean to you in all its essence?
Ah, I have a real problem with the way people perceive poetry now. People think you need a particular type of left brain, right brain, whatever, to actually enjoy poetry. It's nothing of the kind. Poetry is just our most primitive, our most fundamental expressions, our most fundamental feelings and experiences distilled in a few words. And you don't you don't need to overthink it, but at the same time, please don't take it as Twitter or Insta. You need to give it a few more moments. You do need to give it a few more moments to crystallize, to distill, to experience it. So a poem is not asking much of you. It's not asking anything in particular. You don't need to be a hi-fi intellectual. It is asking a few moments. And at the end of the day, I think what a poem or any poetry can do with the reader is is maybe tickle and provoke their imagination. And that's all. The rest is really up to the reader where they take that point forward in their own mind. So a poem doesn't need to be a story. A poem just maybe needs to be a starting point. But yes, frankly, I have found poetry to be more or less like my life jacket, the thing that keeps you afloat in very choppy waters.
Correct.
The thing that helps you, for me, the thing that has helped me process reality and process my life and process not only my life but things that I've seen and things that have disturbed or impacted me, and make sense of them, and try and make something better and more beautiful out of it. And yes, I've written a number of poems to poetry. I'm just going to read a few lines from one of the poems in Petrica that is called poetry. It says, "The sigh in amber evenings, the song of misplaced love, the epitaph to hubris, to the last sparrow nibbling in our village courtyard. It is you. It is you that helped me make sense of more than I ever found words for. The blind boy singing to the dark, the skeletal mother nursing life, the joy in puddles, in paper boats that sail too short, The bitter umber in burnt sunsets, the tangy taste of spring dawns, the cool swig of sudden chuckles, the sweet breezes of some love, the dark chocolate sticky on fingertips of pleasure was your presence. Vocabulary and syntax both failed me. At the most crucial of times, but like a summer storm, you descended and poured on me, and I knew each time it was you.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. I feel that we could go on listening to you. And if you just permit me, I'd like to read a line or two from the acknowledgement of A Life of Light. May I just go
Oh,
ahead with
sure.
when I was reading the acknowledgement, I could somehow resonate with it because you mentioned that poetry is the individual expression of universal human emotions. But during my scribblings over the years, I somehow felt that my inner journey had no universality. And perhaps no other person had felt quite the same emotion with the same intensity in the history of mankind. That is something that touched me. But why I also asked you this is because later I read that I realized that the repertoire of human emotions is like the seven notes in music. A musical combination is a unique and distinct arrangement of these seven notes, each composition distinct from the other. And these poems are to me a personal composition of the inherently universal. And that is why I thought I should ask you that what poetry means to you. Now, coming to this book, I notice a foreword by Mr. Khushwant Singh. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, actually, Kushwant Singh ji, the famous columnist and author, I don't know him. I didn't know him at all. On one fine day, I just typed out some poems, wrote a handwritten note, and sent it to his address in Delhi. And the next thing I know is I get a call from him in a soft, feeble voice, and I had to ask three times like who's speaking, and subsequently we got meeting a lot. He sent off my initial lot of poems to I think various newspapers who carried full page or whatever stuff, and we met and we kept talking, and he kept telling me ki, why don't you put together a book, and I kept telling him ki nahi, मेरे से नहीं होगा, I don't have the time, and B, they're not readable. But anyway, so I think his biggest input, and then he said he actually posted this handwritten forward to me, and then the next time he met, he said, "पता नहीं कब publish करोगी? मेरे जीते जी या मेरे मरने के बाद मैंने तुम्हें forward भेज दिया है, अब तो कर दो publish." So yes, he was a wonderful mentor, and I'm glad that he did get to see my books published. He wrote about me various times, but more than that, I think his belief and his wonderful grand mentorship that helped me have some confidence.
Well, I'm glad he pushed you, because today that has resulted in four wonderful books of poetry. So one of them is Petrichor, the other one is A Life of Light. And now I'm coming to two collections which are purely in Hindustani, Zara Si Dhoop and Ki Ujale Mein. Before I put the next question to you, I would want you to read your favorite Hindi poem first.
Listen, I don't have a favorite Hindi poem. I'm writing all the time, even now. But I'm going to read one of the first poems I did write in Hindi, in which so obviously now I think I can write better. That's the point. But I still like it. It has tones of feminism, of inqilab, and a poet should always be a rebel at heart is also part of my thinking. So this poem is called मुझे चाहिए. जो तुम्हारी राहों में सजती हैं सदियों से, मुझे भी वो सुर्ख सरगर्मियां चाहिए. जो तुम्हारी राहों में सजती हैं सदियों से, मुझे भी वो सुर्ख सरगर्मियां चाहिए. आवाम की बगावत आवाम की बगावत का अंजाम है जो हलचल. मुझे वो अशांत आजादियां चाहिए. And people promise you much and then you realize you can do much. रखो अपने पास, रखो अपने पास अपने वादों का महफूज किला. रखो अपने पास अपने वादों का महफूज किला. मुझे तो रोज अपने हाथों बनती बिगड़ती बुलंदियां चाहिए. समझदारी के दामन में हो शायद ठंडक, समझदारी के दामन में हो शायद ठंडक. फिर भी मुझे, फिर भी मुझे सुलगती आरज़ू की गर्मियाँ चाहिए. बिन मांगे जैसे मैंने की, बिन मांगे जैसे मैंने की, अब मुझको तुमसे कुछ बेतुकी कुर्बानियाँ चाहिए, कुछ बेतुकी कुर्बानियाँ चाहिए. और आखिरी शेर, मेरे तिनकों के आशियाने ने हिम्मत बढ़ा दी इस कदर, मेरे तिनकों के आशियाने ने हिम्मत बढ़ा दी इस कदर कि अब जीने के लिए मुझे बेखौफ आंधियां चाहिए.
वाह वाह, दिल खुश हो गया. कमिंग टू दिस फ्लेवर ऑफ फेमिनिज्म, पहले तो परमजीत सिंह का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. परमजीत सिंह जी हमें बहुत सुन रहे हैं इस वक्त, और उन्होंने कमेंट लिखा था, प्लीज आस्क सुमिता जी टू रिसाइट सम हिंदुस्तानी पोएट्री. सो द मोमेंट आई सॉ दैट, आई थॉट दिस इज माय चांस एंड आई मस्ट सीज इट. सो थैंक यू परमजीत सिंह जी आपके कमेंट के लिए, और आपकी ख्वाहिश हमने पूरी की. एंड नाउ कमिंग टू द फ्लेवर ऑफ फेमिनिज्म दैट हैज बीन रनिंग थ्रू द पोएम्स एंड रनिंग थ्रू अ कॉन्वर्सेशन राइट फ्रॉम बिगिनिंग. मैं जब आपकी कविताएं पढ़ती हूँ तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है उसके दो पहलू हैं. देयर इज अ डुअलिटी. एक तरफ वुमनहुड की सेलिब्रेशन है, वी आर सेलिब्रेटिंग बीइंग अ वुमन, बट ऑन द अदर हैंड एक औरत होने की जो स्ट्रगल्स हैं वो भी है. तो ये डुअलिटी क्यों, ये दो पहलू क्यों?
क्योंकि ये डुअलिटी सच है ना, यही हकीकत है. और नाइंसाफी होगी अगर हम अपने वुमनहुड को ना सेलिब्रेट करें, और भी नाइंसाफी होगी अगर हम ये ना देखें that while some of us might be privileged and empowered, there are so many of us, so many girls. There are 10, I mean, there are so many girls who are dying before they're born in this country. I don't want to give figures because it's very depressing. There is so much inequality, there's so much injustice, there's so much violence. वो भी सब सच है. And one of the poems I wrote long, and उस सच के साथ साथ, I think the biggest burden that women carry in our society is this burden of judgment, is this burden of labels. कि this is what a good woman is. अगर वो अच्छी लड़की है तो ऐसी होगी, अगर अच्छी लड़की है तो वो अपने को ऐसी सिचुएशन में नहीं डालेगी कि उसके साथ ऐसा कुछ हो. We are experts at victim shaming and victim blaming, at judging women where they don't need to be judged, and therefore constricting the spaces that women can occupy, the
We
places that they,
basically putting them in boxes, that okay, this is a check,
yeah,
be like this.
yeah, and I mean, one of the poems that I wrote, I can't seem to get it now, was about this only. He Nado, which I shared recently on Twitter, and which was much talked about. I'm still looking for that. Anyway, uh, so this whole universe of judgment is something I think that we really need to let go of. We can't tell women that we believe, or our daughters that we believe in you, and then tell them that they can't do so many things, or that they can only do till here and no more, because फिर दुनिया क्या कहेगी और तुम्हारी शादी नहीं होगी and all that stuff. And the second thing that I really feel is that yes, I do believe that the sisterhood needs to uh, be a real thing. But more than that, I think it's men that need to change and lean in. We've heard about this whole thing of lean in for women. No, it's men who need to lean in. I'm so glad you mentioned my husband because I think all the things that I think or believe and all the ways that I feel I can be myself is in a huge way due to first my parents and then the person I'm with, my life mate. And that's where the role of men comes in as fathers, as husbands, as brothers, as people on the streets. Uh, Feminism, I don't want to get into any debate about political feminism, but for me, feminism is simply giving women and men equal opportunities in life and equal freedoms in life. That's it. And that doesn't need that, all that needs is to give a degree of humanness to the other. Stop looking at women as just women or sex objects or whatever have you. Just let us be. That's it.
I think that's the raging debate these days also now that, before anything, before gender even touches us, we're all people and we all have some dreams, some ambitions. But, the tag of being a woman downplays those ambitions, and hence the work reality of a woman is way different from that of a man. I think
Yeah.
what I'm getting at now is that, does your work reality have any influence or play in your poetry? Does it ever bring any influence or inspiration to the way you write?
Yes, of course. In fact, I think my work has, but before I go to that, I finally found the poem.
Great. I've been wanting to hear it since so long, since
This
I've
is a very short poem in Hindustani. I have in my new book, as you've read, I think more than one poem on the experience of womanhood and one's views about that. But I'll just read this short one, which is called Nado. न दो मुझे शराफत और नेकी का वास्ता न दो मुझे शराफत और नेकी का वास्ता मेरी नेकी जो मुझे करे कैद और तुमको आजाद because that's what labels and judgments do. मेरी नेकी जो मुझे करे कैद और तुमको आजाद जो बिन कोई खता दे मुझे सजा और खतावार को रिहाई न दो उस चीज की दुहाई ये है समाज का एक तरफा कायदा क्या हुआ क्या हुआ ऐसी नेकी को किसी औरत को फायदा so just that.
correct.
Yes, back to
So
the question.
yes, so in relation to that, before I elaborate on that question, I'd want you to read Apno Ki Duniya because that sort of brings together the work reality and ambitions that we were talking about before this.
Okay, Apno Ki Duniya is a relatively short poem. I'm not going to give any preface. I'll just read it. It's not only about Meri Duniya or Meri Naukri, but I think maybe many people will relate to it in their own ways. अपनों की दुनिया भुलानी पड़ती है अपनों की दुनिया भुलानी पड़ती है गैरों की हुकूमत बजानी पड़ती है दिस पार्ट डेफिनेटली ट्रू राइट अपनों की दुनिया भुलानी पड़ती है गैरों की हुकूमत बजानी पड़ती है एक मंजिल को पाने में कई मंजिलें गंवानी पड़ती है एक मंजिल को पाने में कई मंजिलें गंवानी पड़ती हैं संजीदगी का हिजाब ओढ़कर संजीदगी का हिजाब ओढ़कर हंसती हुई सूरत छुपानी पड़ती है लम्हों की शबनम सूख गई शाखों पे लम्हों की शबनम सूख गई शाखों पे वक्त की धूप में प्यास बुझानी पड़ती है सिमटते दिलों के दायरे दिस इज आई थिंक ऑल्सो अ रिफ्लेक्शन ऑन आवर टाइम्स सिमटते दिलों के दायरे फैले हुए हाथ कितने रिश्तों से वफाएं निभानी पड़ती हैं you feel torn between all the need and anguish in the world around us पर आगे खेल ही है मगर खतरनाक खेल ही है मगर खतरनाक होशियारी से हर मोहरे को यहाँ चाल चलानी पड़ती है खेल ही है मगर खतरनाक, होशियारी से हर मोहरे को यहाँ चाल चलानी पड़ती है। और आखिर अंजाम पे मुमकिन मायने मिले न मसरत। आई थिंक ईच वन ऑफ अस क्वेश्चंस what we are doing and to what end. अंजाम पे मुमकिन मायने मिले न मसरत, लेकिन इस सब्ज बाग में उम्र बितानी पड़ती है।
एक बार फिर आई एम लॉस्ट फॉर वर्ड्स और मैं सिर्फ वाह कह सकती हूँ। लेकिन आपसे एक और सवाल करना चाहूँगी टू ऑल द वुमेन हू आर लिसनिंग टू अस एंड टू ऑल द यंग लेडीज हू आर लिसनिंग टू अस स्पेशली, if there's any one advice that you could give them, what would that be?
Now that's a big question. I have a ton of advice to give, but this is not a session. This is not a session on gender issues. I'm just going to read a few lines from Petrarca, a poem which I wrote, again thinking of all the young women, all my daughters, and it says as much. In today's tribe of my daughters, there is all this. All this meaning the ambivalence and the pain of what we endured as an older generation, and the touching bewilderment of the young. Summer storms, lightning, and the wetness of rain only youth can know. Yet I see their ease of faith as if the future had arrived already. I too yearn to believe the same for their lives. But whatever I know they shall speak stronger. They shall harness the winds better. They will not surrender. One second. They will not surrender before the tide turns, as their mothers did not. Yet they will not expend a life or over lost causes. They will not battle between being victorious and being good. They will be able to ride the tiger proudly. They will be able to ride the tiger proudly, flaunting female form and power. They will not need to lay siege to a world of inequality. Their fight will be smaller and much, much bigger. The one common to men and women everywhere in all times to come. To find, to find and be oneself.
Great. I will ask all the women out there to read this poem again and to take heed of the advice given in there. But
Thank you, Niharika.
so talking about this book only, Petrarch, there is one poem. No, I think it was A Life of Light. Yeah, A Life of
Hmm.
Light. The very first poem, when I read it, it's about the fears of adulthood and how, adulthood can be a struggle in itself. But it's given a very different title. So, and there is no relation between the title and the words of the poem. So, talk to us about that and why did you title the poem as Initiation?
I think you answered your question, as you asked it, because the poem is titled Initiation and it is about an introduction to adulthood. That's it. And the fact that adulthood is so much more complex and so much more challenging. And that even, the most empowering and loving childhood cannot quite prepare you for the knocks and challenges that a person faces as an adult in the world on their own. And that is the whole point of this poem, that this it says the terrors of adulthood align unabated. So that is why it's initiation. This was one of my earliest poems, and in fact it's the first poem in that book, so it really is a stepping out poem.
Correct. And it is definitely a stepping out poem. Talking about this theme of titles not being related to the words below, there is another one that I'm reminded of, which is called Evening Walk. Did the title of that poem come to you first, or was it the poem which gave birth to the title?
No, actually, I'm actually trying to look for it. I don't have it here. Yeah, actually, this poem just wrote itself. I was actually out for an evening walk in Chandigarh, and the sun was setting, and there were these big swarms of birds flying home, and that's what led me to think that they know that they have the one home to fly home to. And many of us are जो जिंदगी में कहते हैं ना खाना बदोश, तो हमारी तो नौकरी नहीं हमें खाना बदोश कर रखा है. So you wonder कि हम कहाँ अगर शाम ढले कहीं फ्लाई करना हो तो हम कहाँ जाएंगे. And that was it. That is why the poem is Evening Walk, and I can read a few lines if you want, or
Yes,
maybe have the.
of course, we'd love to hear.
It's a very simple poem, Evening Walk. To assemble life's jigsaw slowly, bit by bit. To assemble life's jigsaw slowly, bit by bit, with misshapen pieces that don't quite fit. Something I think that we all do. To balance the dead weight of each insistent day with the weight of gossamer dreams that refuse to go away. To stride with the wind and breathe in the colors of spring, knowing that you may never, like those homing birds, take wing. These or similar are tales untold. Each life has a secret story. These or similar are tales untold. Each life has a secret story, whose living is courage itself, more real than any fable of glory.
Wow. So while you were reading, I just took the liberty to scroll on the right of the screen with the comments from our viewers flowing in. And
Mhm.
from the bottom, so Anuradha Saxena ji says, very true that. And Ashok Chaudhary ji says, it is great with you, ma'am, that you have maintained both the officer and the woman within you. It is very difficult, but still you have managed it. Thank you, Ashok
Thank you.
Chaudhary ji, for
Thank
your
you.
comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
And about that, Ritu Kumarji says, pertinent and precise utterances, loved your take, ma'am. I think this must have been in consonance with the conversation on gender and the poems that we were reading at that point of time. And Anuradha Saxena ji says, great. And Satish Sabharwal ji says, Sumita ji, excellent contemporary poetry, love it. Well, Satish
Thank
sir,
you. Thank
we
you.
all love poetry.
फिर हम और
And
सुनाना चाहते हैं भाई.
हाँ जी मैम, तो मैं आपको वही कहने वाली थी कि हम और सुनना चाहते हैं। हमारा दिल नहीं
अच्छा,
भर
कुछ पूछना पड़ेगा ना तुम्हें.
सो मेरा अगला सवाल आपके लिए ये है दैट देयर इज़ अ पोएम टाइटल्ड इन माय डिफेंस। Now, if I talk about that poem, it's in Petrikar. There is no particular theme or there is no one thought which can bind that poem. In one line, you talk about scholarly tones, in the other line, you talk about mountains. Why don't you read us that and why don't you take us through the journey of writing that poem or the thought behind it?
Okay, I'm not going to read the whole poem because I'll read a few lines because I do want to share some of my Hindustani poems later on, and I think we might be running short of time. This poem is called In My Defense. I'll just read, I think, two. All I can say, all I can say in my defense is that I am the chronicler of the lost, that I am the chronicler of the lost, of the incoherent sentence, drowned in the vigor of the eloquent. All I can say in my defense is that I am the chronicler of the lost, of the incoherent sentence, lost, drowned in the vigor of the eloquent. The crumpled dog-eared tome, forgotten, forgotten amidst arresting page turners, a half-strangled cry echoing in the dome of mind's rarely visited corners. In a world of increasing practicality, someone must record the precipice, where the tethers loosen on gravity and life plunges dizzily into free fall. I stand for temporary decay of reason, the village which the belief in madness as normal for a season. The abyss ever known, the swift rebound forenoon. So, yes, this poem is about the fact that we have gotten too burdened with constructs, with reason, with expectations, and for creativity, the mind must be allowed to roam free, to wander free in the jungles of the night, in the jungles of the unknown. We must realize that what we know is but a drop in the universe, firstly. Secondly, all that we see is not all that we know. There are universes unknown, unseen, undetected, both in space and in our minds, that we must give acknowledgement in space to. And of course, I'm always with the underdog, so it also says that. So it says many things. It says that, I don't want to be the balladeer of victory and goodness always. I want to be the one with the voice of dissonance for maybe the underdog, for the one maybe nobody is understanding or talking about. So it covers a broad spectrum, and which I try to condense in very few words. And I'm glad that you picked this poem. I'm surprised. Thank you.
No, well, actually, it caught my attention because of this only that, क्लास में जैसे जाके टीचर से नहीं पूछते कि इसका क्या मतलब हुआ या इसका क्या मतलब हुआ, मैंने वैसे ही लिखा था कि ये पोएम पढ़ने के बाद मैं आपसे पूछूंगी कि आप क्या कहना चाह रही थी इस पोएम के साथ, और आपसे सुनूंगी, आपसे जानूंगी। और
Thank
अब
you.
जो मुझे आपसे जाननी है वो ये है कि जब आप एक भाषा में लिखती हैं और जब आप दूसरी भाषा में लिखती हैं, फ्रॉम इंग्लिश टू हिंदी एंड हिंदी टू इंग्लिश, क्या आपके थॉट प्रोसेस में कोई चेंज होता है? डज द प्रोसेस ऑफ राइटिंग योर पोएट्री चेंज व्हेन यू आर राइटिंग इन हिंदुस्तानी और व्हेन यू आर राइटिंग इन इंग्लिश?
Okay, you know what? I have thought about your question even on my own. So I realized that I don't choose the language, the poem chooses the language, which makes it easier for me. There are thoughts, there are emotions that come out only in Hindustani, there are those that can only be expressed in English for me. What I do want to share is that, I started writing in English. I was writing in English bachpan se, and it was much later, and which is something I think that I'm a bit abashed about. It was much later in life that I turned to the language of my roots, the language of my city, Lucknow, which was Hindustani, jo bhi hamari bolchal ki bhasha thi. And and I have loved that process of connecting back to my roots. um, and as I said, they're two parallel universes. I don't find an overlap. There's not something which I say in Hindustani and want to say again in English. There's nothing I want to say in English. I say in English and want to repeat it in English. They're two parallel universes, and I think God is kind that I'm a part of both.
शायद इसलिए अगर आप मोहब्बत को या मियाद जैसी कविता लिखती हैं तो उसको कोई अगर अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद करेगा तो शायद सेम फ्लेवर नहीं आएगा। व्हाई डोंट यू रीड एंड
I'm glad you mentioned flavor. मुझे लगता है कि अपनी भाषा में लिखने से जो मजा मुझे मिला है वो अलग है। वो आई हैव रिटन अ बुक कॉल्ड पेट्रिका, बट वो जो सौंधी मिट्टी की खुशबू है ना, वो मुझे अपने आई थिंक अपनी हिंदुस्तानी राइटिंग में मिली है। एंड आई वुड यू मेंशन मोहब्बत को, अगेन इट्स अ पोएम विद वेरी स्मॉल लाइन्स। पुरानी कविता रचना है, but I still like it, so I will share it. And then, who doesn't love a love poem?
ऑफ कोर्स
Yes. मोहब्बत को हर बंदिश और रिवाज, मोहब्बत को हर बंदिश और रिवाज से जुदा रखना चाहिए। मोहब्बत को हर बंदिश और रिवाज से जुदा रखना चाहिए, मगर महबूब के अलावा अपना कोई और भी खुदा रखना चाहिए। मगर महबूब के अलावा अपना कोई और भी खुदा रखना चाहिए। दोज़ख में जलकर भी जन्नत से, दोज़ख में जलकर भी जन्नत से कुछ बनाकर सिलसिला रखना चाहिए। अब तो सीख लो, अब तो सीख लो चिलमन में मन के इरादों को, छुपा रखना चाहिए। छांट दो एहसास की तन्हाइयां, रिश्तों के खाते में नफा रखना चाहिए। कोई कुछ भी रोमांच का वादा करे, कोई कुछ भी रोमांच का वादा करे, शाम ढले रास्ता पहचाना तयशुदा रखना चाहिए। और आखिर में जो मेरा भी पर्सनल फेवरेट है, खुशामदों का चलन है, खुशामदों का चलन है, मगर हमारा मानना है, खुशामदों का चलन है मगर हमारा मानना है, एक आध बंदे को तो खफा रखना चाहिए।
किसी को जिंदगी में खफा नहीं किया तो क्या किया, और प्यार को प्यार ही रहने दो, रिश्तों का इल्जाम ना दो। दैट इज व्हाट इट
Yeah,
रिमाइंड्स ऑफ व्हेन यू वर
yeah,
रीडिंग,
yeah,
एंड
very much.
दिल चाह रहा है मियाद की रचना सुनने को।
Miad, I'm again surprised that you mention it because it's one of the smallest poems I've written, and हाँ हमें भी पसंद है। और खैर, नो प्रीफेस। मियाद, हर एक ख्वाब की मियाद तय होनी चाहिए, हर एक ख्वाब की मियाद तय होनी चाहिए, चाहे पूरा हो या अधूरा हो, एक जुनून की एक उम्र तय होनी चाहिए, उसकी फिराक या पाने में, जीने में या गंवाने में, सब्र और कोशिश की एक हद तय होनी चाहिए। गर ये होता तो कुछ आसान हो जाता, गर ये होता तो कुछ आसान हो जाता, बेहिसाब उम्मीद का दायरा खिंच जाता, बेहिसाब उम्मीद का दायरा खिंच जाता, नए ख्वाबों को उगने के लिए भी आखिर कुछ जगह होनी चाहिए, नए ख्वाबों को उगने के लिए भी आखिर कुछ जगह होनी चाहिए। शुक्रिया।
इस बार मैं कुछ नहीं बोलूंगी, अर्चना मिश्रा जी हैं जो कह रही हैं, वाह सच अ ब्रिलियंट पीस। यस, so these are the
Thank
comments
you.
coming in from our viewers. And since we are on the topic of translation and flavor in one language and the other, there are two poems. One is titled Ganit, and the other is titled Calculus. I read them both on different days, but the moment I read them, I felt that one was supposed to be a translation of the other because they are similar in a lot of ways. They have a mathematical name and they dwell on the themes of hope. Was it meant to be that way, or did that just happen on its own?
No, as I said, there is never a translation or even a parallel. Calculus was written years and years ago, one of my earliest poems, and Ganit is much later. Uh, Ganit is about again, I will have to find it anyway. Ganit, I will just read a few lines and calculus maybe, but there's never a translation or a parallel. मन्नतें और मिन्नतें हमने भी की थी, पर जहां की भीड़ में वो शायद तमाम ही रही। मन्नतें और मिन्नतें हमने भी की थी, पर जहां की भीड़ में वो शायद तमाम ही रही। दीवार पर टंगी मेरे भगवान की तस्वीर मुस्कुराती रही, दीवार पर टंगी मेरे भगवान की तस्वीर मुस्कुराती रही, मेरी दुआएं और कोशिशें खुद के लिए नाकाम ही रही। सोच का खलल होगा जो सजा लगती रही, and this is important for us to realize many times in life. सोच का खलल होगा जो सजा लगती रही, वो सौगातें वक्त की जो शायद हम पर इनाम ही रही। Just some lines from Ganit and calculus, which is actually a whole different concept. Calculus is about, okay, maybe there's some similarity, but they're like too many years apart. Calculus says, in the caverns and hollows of my eyes, disquiet grows. On mossy banks and trails across my mind in lush vines. In a numb and baffled valley, in a numb and baffled valley, laughter is heroic madness. The creed by which we attempt to defeat or at least call truce with pain. Hope, hope that most commonplace of indulgences is for the weakest. Yet it tempts me too. A vampire lover sucking the life of every moment in the anticipation of the next. What have I missed? What have I missed that my life seems an encroachment on myself, not an expression of it? There must be a technique to living. There must be a technique to living that some rare sprites do it so easily. Consciousness calculus, consciousness calculus applied to maximize the meaning of an obscure existence. Is that it? So,
Great.
two very different approaches.
I think, this only reminds me that any and everything in life just connects. Any and everything in universe and nature finally connects. So as you mentioned, you wrote these at two different points of time and there was no intention of it being a translation. But to me, as a reader, it's like that. I think you're
I'm
very
very, I mean, I'm impressed that you found that connection. So you're a very good reader.
कुछ तो है राब्ता बस इतना कह सकती हूँ कुछ तो है राब्ता इससे पहले कि हम अपने ऑडियंस को बोले कि वो अपने सवाल हमें कमेंट बॉक्स में लिखें एक आखिरी सवाल आपसे जो नए उभरते कलाकार और कवि हैं उनको आप क्या कहना चाहेंगे व्हाट एडवाइस वुड यू लाइक टू गिव टू न्यू पोएट्स एंड जस्ट coming into this uncharted territory?
You know, the first thing about poetry is that ki संत तुलसीदास ने भी रामचरितमानस स्वांता सुखाय लिखी थी मीन्स फॉर माई ओन प्लेजर सो यू स्टार्ट राइटिंग पोएट्री inherently as self expression and for one's own pleasure, for one's own release. Maybe it's catharsis, maybe so poetry has a great so all of us or many of us think we are closet poets, we are great poets in the making, which is great, the more the merrier. So, but that leads us to be very self indulgent while writing poetry. I'm just leaving this thought and then I'm going on to the next. I will come back to it. So the first bit of advice I would like to give anyone who's whether they're writing prose or poetry is to read, read, and read. I think I am my greatest resource, and I do. It's not a resource I turn to. कि अच्छा अब इसकी कविता पढ़ लूं फिर मैं ऐसा कुछ लिखूंगी. No, just read for the pleasure of reading. Let it absorb. Let it distill. Let it filtrate through your consciousness. The more you read, the more you will realize what kind of poetry has survived these centuries. Why somebody who wrote 2000 years ago or 1000 years ago or 500 years ago is still resonating, because there is a universality of reach. Let that percolate. Read is number one. Number two, of course, is write as much as you want, write on everything. If somebody can write an ode to a Grecian urn, you can write an ode to your thali. um, write whatever it is that captures your imagination or eye or fancy. But the third, the most important, and which comes from the first thought that I had left you with, is that be very, very ruthless with yourself. You might write 10 poems and discard 9 of them as self indulgent drivel, which is mostly what I do. So, so So, if anything, be ruthless, edit, go back. You know, when I write a poem, for a couple of hours or that night, I'm floating, I'm high, I'm happy. कि मतलब पता नहीं क्या लिख दिया है आज. I come back to it 2-3 days later and I say ये क्या लिख दिया है. So it's but in totally different context. So be very ruthless with yourself. Don't be self indulgent, be ruthless, and then you might reach somewhere. Somewhere.
Great. Well, I hope all the poets, the young poets, or even the upcoming ones, anybody who's writing poetry heard that and is going to heed that advice because it comes from a renowned and practiced poet that we're
No,
in
I don't know
conversation.
if I'm either, but just sharing my learning along the way.
No, I think it's all relative. So as you can see from the comment in the comment box, Archana Mishra ji says that, "Ma'am, you're my inspiration, and I have started writing, making an attempt." So we draw inspiration from the people around us, and if we have examples like yours, ma'am, to look at, then I think the journey becomes a little bit easier and more enjoyable. So I think.
That's so kind of you, Niharika. That's so kind.
ये रिक्वेस्ट मैम मेरी तरफ से नहीं आ रही है, ये रिक्वेस्ट संदीप मिश्रा जी की तरफ से आ रही है जो कह रहे हैं, कैन वी हैव अ फ्यू लाइंस फ्रॉम मुझे क्या मिला फ्रॉम योर कलेक्शन जरा सी धूप.
Oh my God. संदीप, आई एम इम्प्रेस्ड. अब मैं ढूंढती हूँ. मुझे क्या मिला है इज वन ऑफ माय फ्यू पोएम्स जो एक्चुअली हिंदी में लिखी गई है, बिकॉज अदरवाइज एज आई सेड हम हिंदुस्तानी में लिखते हैं और उसी में सोचते हैं. अब मैं ढूंढ रही हूँ. मुझे क्या मिला. हाँ, सो मुझे क्या मिला is is a reflection again on Indian society, or let's say society towards women. It's called मुझे क्या मिला. मैं मीरा नहीं, मैं मीरा नहीं, फिर भी विष का प्याला मैंने पिया तुम्हारे लिए. मैं मीरा नहीं, फिर भी विष का प्याला मैंने पिया तुम्हारे लिए. मीरा को मिले कान्हा और उनकी लीला. मुझे क्या मिला. मैं सीता नहीं, फिर भी बेकसूर अग्नि परीक्षा में मैं जली तुम्हारे लिए. सीता को मिला क्षणिक राजपाट और मुक्ति. मुझे क्या मिला. मैं अनुसुईया नहीं, फिर भी शर्मसार पीड़ा मैंने उठाई तुम्हारे लिए. अनुसुईया को मिली ईश्वरीय और जग प्रशंसा. मुझे क्या मिला. This is all about the roles that Indian women discharge with too little in return. मैं सावित्री नहीं, मैं सावित्री नहीं, फिर भी भाग्य से काल से मैं लड़ी तुम्हारे लिए. सावित्री को मिला प्रेम और अनंत सतीत्व. मुझे क्या मिला. मैं पार्वती नहीं, फिर भी निष्ठुर त्याग में मैं तपी तुम्हारे लिए. पार्वती को मिले शिव और अखंड भोग. मुझे क्या मिला. नारीत्व की ये कथाएं हैं पिंजड़े तुम्हारे दिए. नारीत्व की ये कथाएं हैं पिंजड़े तुम्हारे दिए. किसी भी युग में आदर्शों की मिथ्या में, समाज के चक्रव्यूह में, जीवन जननी को कब क्या मिला. मुझे क्या मिला.
हमें संदीप जी का शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहिए इस पीस को मेंशन करने के लिए और इस पोएम को पढ़वाने के लिए. आई थिंक वी वुड हैव मिस्ड अ gem in all of these, had you not read that out, ma'am, and I'm so grateful that you did. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Malika, our very own Malika mentions earlier that I remember tearing up to ma'am's poem about daughters on the day of the launch of Petrichor. It's always so spellbinding to watch her read and take a peek into her mind. I'm sure it is. And ma'am, a lot of people want to know where they can buy your books from. So if you can give us a
Okay, so
details on
Malika,
that.
I cannot read that poem because every time I read that poem, I also get a little emotionally overwhelmed. I asked me, but thank you for the question about where you can buy my books. They're all on Amazon and Flipkart. Hopefully, they're definitely on Amazon, but I think Flipkart too. So, thank you, folks, and thank you for that question.
And I think अब हमारा वक्त आ गया है आपसे विदा लेने का. It's been a great, lovely evening of reading poetry, and I'm sure we will need another separate conversation to talk about things left in between, the loose ends that we all left in between. But in any case, हमारी ऑडियंस का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया इस शाम हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए. और एक और ख़ास बात आपको ये बताना चाहूँगी कि सीएलएस का स्टोरी राइटिंग कॉम्पिटिशन जो है, उसके लिए एंट्रीज़ ओपन हो चुकी है। डू राइट योर हार्ट अवे एंड सेंड योर एंट्रीज़ टू अस। यू कैन फाइंड द डिटेल्स ऑन योर फेसबुक पेज, जिसका नाम है चंडीगढ़ लिटरेरी सोसाइटी। और अगर आप इंस्टाग्राम ज़्यादा शौक से यूज़ करते हैं, तो सीएलएस चंडीगढ़ हमारा हैंडल है। डू फॉलो अस देयर। डू कीप गिविंग अस योर लव, योर सपोर्ट। आपके प्यार के हम बहुत-बहुत आभारी हैं। शुक्रिया
Thank you so
और
much. I really enjoyed today. As I said, it's like being at home. And but thank you everyone who joined in. Thank you, Niharika, for such interesting questions. I've really had a good time. Thank you.
thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity. And like I said, I've learned the art of conversation from you. So
You're damn good yourself, yaar.
all right.
Okay, thank you everyone.
This is us saying goodbye to